Tonight, hate crime attacks.
Our building was vandalized and our communication system was torn off of our door.
Crisis pregnancy centers under fire as the Supreme Court prepares to deliver a decision that could strike down Roe versus Wade. Plus, the Fed chair in the hot seat as Wall Street roils new questions over inflation and sky-high gas prices. And Operation Octopus, Israel's plan to thwart Iran's arms of terrorist proxies.
I think it's well overdue.
All this and more on Faith Nation. The Supreme Court expanding gun rights even as Congress works towards gun reform. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm George Thomas. Tonight, the High Court striking down restrictions on guns, reversing a state law requiring a concealed carry license that had been on the books for over 100 years. The decision came down in the wake of more mass shootings here in the United States. 19 children killed in a Texas school and 10 people killed last month at a grocery store in Buffalo, New York. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke has more on the court's ruling against the state of New York, and she joins me now from the Supreme Court. Caitlin.
New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin is considered one of the biggest gun rights cases in more than a decade. It focuses on a New York law which requires gun owners to show proper cause before carrying a handgun in public for self-defense. The court's conservative majority ruled that violates the Second Amendment. Justice Clarence Thomas writing, quote, "The New York proper cause requirement violates the Constitution because it only allows public carry licenses when an applicant shows a special need for self-defense." In his dissenting opinion, Justice Breyer pointed to the recent shootings in Uvalde and Buffalo, but Justice Alito pointed out that the New York law did nothing to stop the Buffalo shooter. New York Governor Kathy Hochul was quick to voice her disapproval with the court's ruling.
As governor of the state of New York, my #1 priority is to keep New Yorkers safe. But today, the Supreme Court is sending us backwards in our efforts to protect families and prevent gun violence.
It's also important to highlight that as Congress races to vote on new gun control laws, the Supreme Court has just struck one down. George?
Thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate that report from the High Court. Here with me now is Brad Jacob, constitutional law professor at Regent University. Brad, as always, sir, thank you so much for joining us here tonight on Faith Nation. So the question to you, sir, what does this ruling mean for gun owners in other states apart from New York?
Well, this is the biggest Supreme Court ruling on gun rights since 2010. Because it's the only Supreme Court ruling on gun rights since 2010. It's actually a pretty limited ruling. Most of the questions about guns and gun regulations are still unanswered. What we know is wherever you live, if the government has a regulatory setup that you have to just go ask someone in the government for permission to carry a gun, and they have no standards, they just get to decide whether you get the gun or not, that is unconstitutional. And that'll apply to all the states, or at least the ones that are still using these what they call the may issue laws.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Brad, does this ruling put existing firearm restrictions in other states into immediate legal jeopardy, for example?
Only if there's something like a may issue provision, something that says you've got to go ask permission to get a permit. 43 of the states have what are called shall issue laws. And if you meet all the requirements, maybe you've got to pass a background check, mental health check, whatever it may be, do the paperwork, you are automatically entitled to get your permit. So it would only be in a place that tries to have it as a discretionary denial where they don't need any reason to deny you, those are the only places where the laws are necessarily going to change.
Okay, thanks for expanding on that. One other question before we let you go. The court's ruling today overrides over 100 years of precedent. Does that suggest to you, Brad, that precedent in this is less of an issue for this court as we await on other decisions, namely the Dobbs decision that could potentially overturn Roe versus Wade?
You know, the Supreme Court justices have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, not to uphold prior Supreme Court opinions. If they look at a precedent from an earlier court and say that it's wrong, it's their duty. Their oath of office requires them to overturn that opinion and go with the correct meaning of the Constitution.
Yeah, and what is your sense, Brad, if you were to prognosticate? What do you think, how will they rule?
In the Dobbs case?
Yeah.
Well, I think we've already seen a draft of the majority opinion. I think Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey are going to be overruled.
Yeah, and it'll be a seismic political, spiritual earthquake here in the United States. Brad, as always, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Brad Jacob with Regent University. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You're welcome, sir. As the Supreme Court winds down their term, there are 9 decisions left for the High Court to rule on. The nation is waiting for the Mississippi abortion case, but there are also cases on immigration and religious freedom. I want to bring back my colleague Caitlin Burke, who is at the Supreme Court. Caitlin, earlier this week, we saw a decision come down on a religious freedom case dealing with school choice. There's one more like it that we're keeping an eye on. Can you tell me more about this one?
Yeah, so George, the case is Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, and it involves a public school coach who was fired for preying on school property following a football game. Now, this case deals with 3 First Amendment rights. Coach Kennedy says the school violated his rights under the free speech and free exercise clauses, but the school maintains they would have violated the establishment clause if they had endorsed a religion by allowing Coach Kennedy to pray. George?
Of course, the most highly anticipated ruling of the term is, of course, Dobbs versus Jackson, women's health, the case that could potentially overturn Roe versus Wade. Caitlin, I hear there have been protesters outside the court right there behind you this week. What's the atmosphere like there right now?
Tensions are definitely high, and as you said, still no decision on Dobbs. But as decision days dwindle down, protests are amping up. And, you know, from instances of violence and vandalism and intimidation, pro-life centers are really facing all of it. We've got arson, shattered glass, graffiti, all following the leak of that draft opinion suggesting that the High Court might overturn Roe. And, you know, since then, 40 incidents have been reported.
Our building was vandalized and our communication system was torn off of our door only after some vulgar things happened on camera.
After reporting the incident to the FBI as a hate crime, Annabelle Rutledge, National Director of Young Women for America, says her organization now has posted armed security guards on site and with their staff at the Supreme Court.
There is some agitation that's rising and people are getting more and more agitated as statistically we know that this day is getting closer and closer the closer we get to the end of June.
The Capitol Hill Crisis Pregnancy Center was also targeted. Red paint splattered on their door and the word revenge spray painted on the side of their building.
It made me feel very sad that people would misunderstand what Christian pregnancy centers do.
In spite of that, Janet Durig, executive director of the center, said she feels God's protection.
You know, the red paint on the door, I turned to look at it, and I thought about the blood of the lamb that God told the Israelites to put over their door for protection. And I decided to think of it that way and pray it that way.
Last week, the FBI opened an official investigation into the growing number of threats and attacks. Now, lawmakers are urging the Justice Department to follow suit. More than 100 House Republicans signing a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland asking the DOJ to investigate vandalism and attacks at pro-life centers as domestic terrorism. Unfortunately, things are expected to get worse before they get better. Back in May, the Department of Homeland Security warned there could be a surge of violence after the Supreme Court's ruling is released. Just this week in D.C., flyers have been posted by the group Jane's Revenge. Now, they are advocates for abortion, and they've promised a night of rage if Roe is overturned. The flyers read, quote, "To our oppressors, if abortions aren't safe, you aren't either." George?
Thank you, Caitlin. Excellent reporting there from our I quote. Amid all the Supreme Court showdown drama, the Biden administration is proposing sweeping changes to the Title IX law outlawing discrimination based on sex in schools and colleges. The major points include overhauling campus sexual assault rules, expanding protections for transgender students, and expanding colleges' responsibilities in addressing sexual misconduct. The proposal comes on the 50th anniversary of this historic women's rights law. Coming up, the economy is in dire straits. The Fed chair in charge of fixing it, he's back in the hot seat. New questions over soaring inflation. That report in a moment. Stay with us. And welcome back to the broadcast. Tonight, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell back on Capitol Hill for a second day. Today, appearing before the House Financial Services Committee on Inflation and Economic Woes. CBN's Tara Murgener is here. Powell now acknowledging that a recession could happen. What do you think, Tara?
That's right, George. Not only do many financial experts like the Fed chairman say it could happen, many now warn it is likely. Goldman Sachs predicting a 30% chance of recession this year. That is double the chance from its previous forecast. And now Powell has a new warning.
There is a risk that unemployment would move up from what is a historically low level, though. A labor market with 4.1% or 4.3% unemployment is still a very strong labor market.
Powell's testimony comes with inflation reaching a 40-year high, sending consumer prices surging across the board. President Biden wants Congress to impose a 3-month national federal gas tax holiday for some relief at the pump.
I fully understand that a gas tax holiday alone is not going to fix the problem, but it will provide families some immediate relief.
The national average is near a record $5 a gallon.
The prices of the gas, you can go anywhere.
It feels like all that extra money, the little bit that I had, is not going towards gas.
The current tax is 18 cents for gas and 24 cents for diesel. If suspended, the holiday would potentially save minivan drivers $3.68 a week, or $2.21 for those with a compact car. Many Republicans dismiss this as a gimmick ahead of midterms, while key Democrats aren't keen on the measure either.
I'm not a yes right now, that's for sure.
White House officials and oil executives are meeting face-to-face with the Secretary of Energy.
The fact is that no president alone can control the price of gasoline, and we need more players at the table.
While Biden won't be at the table, he continues to point the finger at energy companies.
There's no time now for profiteering.
And on Wednesday, Powell contradicted Biden's claim that skyrocketing prices are due to the war in Ukraine, saying inflation levels were already high before Russia invaded. George.
Thank you, Tara. Joining me now is Mark Hamrick, Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst for Bankrate. Mark, always a pleasure to have you back on our show tonight here on Faith Nation. So, Mark, do you agree with the Fed chair's overall assessment that the economy is strong, and why?
Well, he's looking at that and referencing the job market in that iteration. And so from that alone, the job market is strong. We have 3.6% unemployment, just a tad above the 50-year historic low of 3.5%, 11 million job openings compared to 6 million officially unemployed. But that's irrelevant to the many Americans who are suffering through the current historically high level of inflation. You think about when we were at the highest peak of unemployment during the early phases of the pandemic, that unemployment rate was 14.7%. it's easy to see that inflation is affecting more than that 14.7% of the workforce that was unemployed. And so I think what Chairman Powell is saying is there is a risk of recession. And by the way, recessions are a natural part of the economic cycle, but as Wall Street is referencing, there is a heightened risk of that because of everything that's going on.
Yeah. Mark, as you mentioned, obviously positive development today with new unemployment numbers. Fewer Americans applying for jobless benefits last week. Certainly a sign of a robust job market. But is it all offset by the record high inflation we're seeing?
Well, obviously one is a positive dynamic and the other is tremendously negative. I think what we'll continue to do here is to monitor these new jobless claims to see if the job market, if unemployment do become worrisome trends. And so far we haven't seen that. We've had unemployment at this low level we just talked about. New jobless claims recently hit the lowest level in 53 years. But anecdotally, George, we are hearing some companies talking about layoffs. We're hearing about some companies pulling down some of the openings that they have posted. In other words, deciding not to fill those positions. So that's something to watch.
Yeah. What do you make of the president's plan to suspend the federal gas tax? I'm curious, could that lead to unintended consequences in terms of, for example, making inflation even more worse?
Well, I think there's a reason why, according to the Washington Post, even within his own administration and Treasury Department, there is not universal support for this idea. It is literally a drop in the bucket, talking about 18 cents off of a gallon of gas that now costs $5. And as you say, unintended consequence could be you end up allowing a higher demand for gasoline. There is an old saying, which is true. One cure for high prices is high prices. Obviously, from a household budget standpoint, there are plenty of people who would like to have an 18 cent a gallon reduction in their gasoline price, but we're not fully confident that even that would be passed along. Indeed, the president sort of implored everybody who's part of that sales process to pass it along if it were to pass. But right now, it's not even clear that Congress would go along anyway. So I think this is really sort of a story of the day, but not a story of the month or the year.
Yeah, real quickly, last few seconds, one more item on those unintended consequences. How likely is it that the Federal Reserve's interest rates hikes plunges the country into a recession?
I don't think it's highly likely at all because the Fed is attentive to what the jobless rate is as well. But the main challenge, as we've been talking about, is inflation, and they need to really remain focused on that.
Okay, terrific. As always, sir, thank you so much for coming on the broadcast. Up next, folks, to stop terrorism, Israel is unveiling Operation Octopus. What does that mean for Iran when we come back? Tonight, many children are now feared to be among the more than 1,000 dead in the aftermath of a powerful earthquake in Afghanistan. Authorities say the death toll is likely to grow far higher. The 5.9 magnitude quake leveling villages in the mountain areas near Pakistan as rescuers race to save people trapped under collapsed homes built of mud, particularly vulnerable after heavy monsoon rains. Even before this disaster, the UN estimating half of the country's 20 million people were experiencing acute hunger. For years, Israel and Iran have been fighting each other in a shadow war. Now, that's changing. Operation Octopus is taking Israel's actions to thwart Iran to a whole new level. Chris Mitchell brings us the details from Jerusalem.
Recently, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett announced new rules of engagement with Iran called Operation Octopus. He said, in the past year, the state of Israel has taken action against the head of the terrorist Octopus. The days of immunity in which Iran attacks Israel and spreads terrorism via its regional proxies but remains unscathed are over.
I think it's well overdue for both Israel and Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrainis, all of these countries that have been victims of the Iranian regime's proxy activity to start to hold Iran accountable rather than the proxies.
Some see a ratcheting up of Israel's covert and even overt operations to thwart Iran's nuclear and conventional missile and drone programs. It could explain the mysterious deaths recently of a number of Iranian nuclear scientists and military leaders. Another example, Israel's recent attack on the Damascus airport, which Israel sees as a major conduit of Iranian weapons on their way to Hezbollah in Syria. Now Israel says Iran is threatening to retaliate by kidnapping or killing Israelis in the region, and especially Turkey.
We're currently witnessing Iranian attempts to attack Israelis in various overseas locations. The security services of the State of Israel are working to thwart attempted attacks before they are launched. We will continue to strike those who send the terrorists and those who send them. Our new rule is, whoever sends, pays.
Israel's Defense Minister Benny Gantz announced a regional cooperative Middle East air defense led by the U.S.
It can help with anything related to Iran's attempts to attack countries of the region using rockets, missiles, cruise missiles, and UAVs. This program is already operative and has already thwarted Iranian attempts that I spoke about on other occasions, both here and in the Middle East in general.
With the collapse of the Israeli government, Middle East expert Eli Konim says Israel is entering a dangerous season.
The regime can see all of this as a moment of vulnerability for the Israelis and try to take advantage. My hope is that the Israelis, as much as they're dealing with elections and cobbling together coalitions and all that, that they do keep their focus on what they call the existential threat to them that the Iranian regime poses.
All this comes as the Iran-U.S. nuclear deal seems on the brink of collapse. Senators on both sides say it's unlikely Iran will agree to any new deal to limit its development of nuclear weapons. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Chris. Coming up, wow, the wildlife treat of a lifetime. A Father's Day surprise you do not want to miss. Wow, look at that. And finally tonight, residents in a North Florida neighborhood were celebrating Father's Day weekend when they received a surprise visitor. Look at that. A large black bear was spotted roaming the manicured streets of Milano. Homeowners in the gated community were utterly shocked that the bear found its way past security, catching the bear and their reactions on camera.
Is there anybody you wanted to see around here, or do you know what address you're going to? Do you have a guest pass?
Florida wildlife officials say black bear sightings in the area are becoming more frequent, right? Yikes, due to expanding development. On that black bear video note, we end this edition of Faith Nation. From all of us here at the headquarters of the Christian Broadcasting Network, have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye. God bless.